Hello, everybody. Aloha and welcome. I'm Natalie, and this is Life After a Cult, the channel where we expose cult nonsense, we laugh at the absurdities, and we try to unbrainwash ourselves in the process. I want you to imagine being about 11 years old, ripped away from your family, and sent to live on a ship in the middle of the ocean, completely at the mercy of a powerful cult leader. No way out, no one to protect you, and punishment so brutal they still haunt you for decades. Now, that was Danielle Chamberlain's reality aboard Scientology's infamous ship, the Apollo. And today she's going to share with us her story, her experience, and what life has been after a cult for her since then. If you have any questions, put question in front of it and I'll try and grab as many as I can. I'll keep an eye on those. And as you come in, please hit that like button to help us get some notifications out. I'm going to bring Danielle up and we will get started. There we go. Hello, Danielle.
Hi.
I'm so glad we got things figured out, and I really appreciate you coming on. This is the first time I've been able to meet you, and I've been looking forward to it because I am familiar somewhat with your story, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us today.
Thank you. No, I'm glad that you've got me on. Thank you very much.
Now, why don't we just literally start at the beginning? I'm going to keep an eye out for questions, so I might grab some as we go along.
Yeah.
But let's just kind of start with the beginning of your story.
Okay, so I was born in Zimbabwe, and which was old Rhodesia in those days, and went down to live in Johannesburg with my parents. My father was French, my mother was Zimbabwean, and she was a journalist. My father was a photographer and an artist, but he was also doing a bit of spy work for the government. We went down to Johannesburg and just lived a pretty normal life, really, until about age 6, when my mother got involved with Scientology through a mission that was being run by a couple called Joss and Hilda Jaffe. From that point on, I started courses at Joburg.org, and pretty much lived, a public member's life.
How old were you when you started your courses?
6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, age 6. I remember doing training routines, TRs at age 6. I wondered, whether or not they just used it as a way to keep kids under control so they weren't running amok while the parents were on doing courses,
I don't doubt that that wasn't part of it. While a lot of
Yeah.
people put their kids on course, it was free
Yeah.
daycare.
No, absolutely. Anyway, so after that, for about 3 years or so, 6, 7, 8, 9, my parents were together, and we were doing courses at weekends, and I was just living a normal public life, going to public school, etc. And then when I was 9 years old, my parents split up, mostly because it turned out that my father had been a plant in Scientology for the mental health organization in South Africa.
So and we might need to elaborate on that. So your father was working for the government of South Africa?
Well, the Mental Health Association of South Africa. I don't know what the equivalent is in the States. I would imagine in the UK it's probably Mind.
Okay.
So they were concerned about Ron Hubbard and the effect he might have on people. He had been kicked out of Rhodesia, he'd been kicked out of Britain, of England, and they were concerned about the impact that he was having on people's lives in South Africa. So they wanted to get some information. So my father was a plant reporting information back to them.
And this is while your mother was in Scientology? Did your mother know?
Well, when my mother found out is when they split up.
Oh.
Yeah, because she was a staunch Scientologist.
And they were married. So as a married couple,
yeah,
or
they
they
didn't
split?
actually ever marry. Long story, but yeah, they were together, and my mother changed her name by deed poll to his name. Yeah.
So your mom's going along in Scientology, and then how did she find out that your dad was actually trying to infiltrate for the government?
know. I'm afraid I have no idea, because you'll hear later, but my mother had a stroke when she was 42 working in the Sea Org, and it halted her memory. And by then, when I was old enough to ask questions and be sort of intrigued about stuff, she couldn't remember. So I never did find out how he was discovered. I have a feeling, I think Jane Kember might have been involved. She was in Johannesburg at the time. So I don't know. I'm not sure.
So this gets found out about
Yeah.
your dad.
Yeah.
And what happened from that point? Did you still have a relationship with your dad?
Very, very little contact. Very little. I mean, he was completely persona non grata, you know, within Scientology. So we were discouraged from speaking to him and seeing him. My mother kind of went to pieces a bit when they split up, but she was still having auditing and doing courses. But then she decided to take us up to live in Zimbabwe, which was still Rhodesia at the time, and put my sister and I into boarding school. My sister I was 9. I think my sister was 6, probably about 7 years old, which is very young to go to boarding school, you know. So that's like another trauma on another trauma.
Yeah. Was it a regular boarding school, or was it a Scientology boarding school?
No, it wasn't a Scientology boarding school. I don't think there were Scientology schools around yet at that stage.
Okay.
We're talking about 1960. 69, something like that, 68, 69. Then we were only in boarding school for a year, and my mother had come down to Johannesburg, and she had started working as a secretary for a guy who was the general manager of legal and general insurance in Johannesburg, who happened to be a Scientologist. And she ended up marrying him, and that marriage didn't last very long at all. It was abusive. There was some essay from my stepbrothers on me and my brother and my sister, and very traumatic again. So we were piling up the trauma here, you know. And so she said, well, what are we going to do? Where can we go? And so she decided to take us to join the Sea Org at St Hill Manor, and we moved in July 1973. I was 11 years old, was going to have my 12th birthday in October of that year.
Okay.
And as you well know, in Scientology, you're an adult in a child's body from sort of age 11. So I had to sign a billion-year contract. My mother became the editor of the Auditor magazine, given her history of having been a journalist. And she did well at that job. She enjoyed it. But it was sold to me that I should go and work as a Commodore's messenger for L. Ron Hubbard on the ship, on the Apollo. And that this was, you know, a very prestigious role. You'll be helping to clear the planet. You're keeping Scientology working. It's the best thing you could ever do. You know, and basically you can't say no, you know, you have to go. So I was sent to the ship. I was flown out there. Leaving my family behind was very traumatic for me. And my mother had just given birth to my little half brother. And he was, you know, just a few weeks old when I left. And I arrived on the ship just before my 12th birthday.
Let me ask you this. Did you have a guardian or somebody who was going to be in charge of you on the ship?
Yeah, so I was flown, I flew by myself on the plane to Lisbon in Portugal, where the ship was docked. I was, I must have had a slip of paper from somebody with a phone number on, because this was before we had mobile phones, or cell phones, as you guys call them. And so I must have had that phone number, because I remember sitting on a chair waiting in the freight area. So the guys would have come from the ship to pick up the freight for the day and the post, and then they would have couriered me to the ship. So once I got on the ship, the first thing that happened is I was taken down to the bunks on the lower decks of the ship, where there was a female dormitory, and next to it was a male dormitory. And it was stuffed to the rafters with beds. I mean, it was packed. There were no wardrobes, so all the clothes were hanging up in closet, sorry.
Mhm.
All the clothes were hanging up, swinging, to as the ship swayed gently on the water. It stunk. It was very dank. It was very dark. And I just thought, what the hell have I come to, And I lay down on my bunk and I just sobbed. And then somebody called Liz Gablehouse came to see me, and another lady, Maggie Sabersky. And they said, you can't leave because that's blowing. They had my passport anyway. I'm an 11-year-old kid, and I'm just thinking, what the hell's going on? So I'd gone from parents splitting up to boarding school for a year, and now this. And it was like, wow, I'd been ripped out from the heart of my family, and that's all I'd known, the only love I'd known. So the first thing they did is get me settled down and said, right, you've got to go and do physical work. So joining kind of what we call the Estates Project Force, the EPF. And I had to do my basics and my orientation and find my way around the ship and go and meet people. And so I started to calm down a little bit, but I was painting the cabins. I'd never painted a cabin in my life, and I was painting cabins. And then they made me what's called the snipes steward. So the snipes are the guys who work in the engine room, and they've got their own little dining room next to the cabin that I was painting. And I actually really enjoyed that job because I was made to feel welcome. They were funny. They were not really acting like Scientologists. They were just acting like normal people,
Yeah.
And they were great. So they kind of enveloped me with, love and friendship, and I enjoyed it. But then came the time when I'd finished my Estates Project Force work, and I had to go and then do sort of cadet work, working for the Commodore's Messenger Org. And that meant ironing the other Commodore's Messenger shirts and uniforms. And I was also sent to clean LRH's kitchen. I had to, I remember having to hoist the ensign. So I must have been on bridge watch at some point. So I was learning the ropes and all that sort of stuff. But I really didn't want to be there. And
And was there any schooling at all, being that you were 11 turning 12?
No schooling. And also, you asked me, sorry, about whether or not there was anybody to mentor me. They did have what they call a buddy system. And this lady called Kennelly Moore was assigned to be my buddy and to look after me. But I never saw her because she was always working. She wasn't allowed to leave her post to just come and check on a kid, and there was no schooling at all. So I had absolutely no terminals that I could go to talk to. Nobody, The only guys that I had fun with were these snipes, but then I'd been taken out of that as well. So I'd been yanked away from that. So I was thinking, well, how the hell am I going to get off this ship? Because I just don't want to be here. So they sent me to work because I still wasn't wanting to play ball. And I was thinking, I'm just going to be as naughty as I possibly can because I'll get offloaded. I was thinking, and I'd had my 12th birthday, and I no presents, no cake, no recognition. It was my birthday. And also your parents back home were not allowed to know where you were. So she had no idea where I was in the universe.
That's crazy. And you're in another country. You're in a whole nother country aboard this ship that can go anywhere. Your mom doesn't know where you are.
No, and we were sailing by this time, so we were sailing from one port to another port to another port to another port. And so she had no idea. And also when you wrote letters, Natalie, everything's redacted. If there's any reference to LRH, where he is, where you are, it was all about saving LRH's face and his security and everything.
Do you recall them telling you why you couldn't tell your mom where you were?
Yeah, it's about protecting LRH and making sure that he's safe, because the big bad SPs out there are coming and they want, they're going after him, and and I didn't know at this stage about him having been kicked out of Rhodesia. I didn't know about him having been kicked out of England, because of course you're never going to hear those stories. Mm-hmm. You're never going to hear them. Yeah. So that's nuts. So I was then sent to the ethics officer, who was Stuart Moreau, and I had to, was assigned a job of filing backlog knowledge reports. And they were up to my waist. There was a huge backlog. Yeah. And I
Wow.
thought, wow, there's no way I'm going to do this. So I shredded them all. And that was what got me into big trouble. I shredded all of the knowledge reports.
In a
And
shredding machine, or did you just
yeah.
tear them up?
No, it's a shredding machine.
Yeah.
And I felt quite good about that, because I really hated this snitching culture anyway. And yeah, it's really bad, you know, and you're reading these when you're filing them, and the stuff people write about other people was just unbelievable.
Do you recall, for our audience who's not so familiar with the type of thing that would go in a knowledge report, and many of you know Scientology has very much a snitch culture, and a knowledge report you write and you're supposed to send a copy to the person you wrote it on, and then a copy goes in their ethics file, which is what you shredded. Do you recall any examples of the kind of stuff that people would report on each other by chance?
Yeah, I can tell you. But also, can I also just say, it was rare for me to ever, if anyone ever wrote one on me, there were some in my ethics folder I never even knew existed because I'd never seen copies of them, you know. But there would be things like, I saw somebody kissing somebody. I saw somebody, I heard somebody saying blah, blah, blah about somebody else. So they're nattering about them. The state of someone's uniform, you know, how it was disheveled. And also I witnessed some fights on that ship, and there would be reports about people fighting, like physical fight.
Wow.
The captain of the ship once came downstairs, and I can't remember who it was. Janice might remember. He came down to what we call tween decks, right near where there's this lovely South African guy called Alan Voss, and he was working in an office off the side, an office space. Mm-hmm. And I saw these two fighting. There was a fist fight going on, and I tried to stop the fist fight. And
whoa.
There was going to be a glancing blow, and Alan pulled me away from the fight. Because also I remember my parents having a fight once, and I tried to stop them they were slapping each other's faces. And I remember that, and I tried to stop them. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand all of it. It was just horrendous, you know?
Yeah, and you're just 12 years old by then.
12 years old, yeah. So they didn't know what to do with me. And by this stage, what's his name? LRH's personal guy. Janice interviewed him. Oh, what's his name? It'll come to me. But he developed the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, when I was on the ship. And they also developed the RPF's RPF. So I was assigned to the RPF and put into liability.
And that was because you shredded all those knowledge reports.
Because I wasn't conforming. I didn't want to become a Commodore's messenger. People couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to be one. I just wanted to go back to my family. That's all I wanted. You know, yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. I had been working in the galley for a while, serving dinners and things like that. Got into big trouble once because the chef or the cook had cooked an egg, and there was a cockroach, and it was served to the captain with a cockroach on the, you know. But yeah. Anyway, I mean, I'm a child anyway, and I just did what I was told, you know, serve this to the captain, take it to the plate, and then I got into trouble, not the bloody chef. You know?
Wow. So you end up being assigned to the Rehabilitation Project Force, which for those that don't know, it's often referred to as Scientology's gulag. It's where they send Sea Org members for rehabilitation, which is really reprogramming. You're only 12 years old. They had just developed the Rehabilitation Project Force on the ship. You were on the Apollo. What was that like?
Horrendous. You're not allowed. I mean, I love people and I like talking to people. I wasn't allowed to speak to anybody. You're not allowed to speak to any member of the crew unless they speak to you first. You can speak to fellow RPFers, you know, other people with you. You have to wear black armbands and black boiler suits. We had to run everywhere. You have to run from A to B, whatever you're doing. You spend most of the day doing physical work. So you're scrubbing the deck. We were painting the side of the ship. We were doing what's called red leading. When there's rust on the ship, you've got to put an undercoat of red lead. You scrape off the paint, clean it all up, rub it down with metal brushes. Then you've got to paint red lead onto it. I mean, I question today too about the health and safety aspect of what's in those paints and what,
Yeah.
we had asbestos on the ship when we were doing sort of fire drills and stuff. People would wear like asbestos suits and stuff. I mean, it was, wow. But anyway, so yeah, lots of physical work. In a way, initially, I quite liked the structure and routine of the RPF because it was like being at school a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You knew there was prediction.
Yeah.
I didn't think you could get into any more trouble than you're already in. So I wasn't so fearful of getting into more trouble yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we did studies at night. So we worked physically all day, which was grueling, but we were very fit. We were very fit at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had to study at night. And that went on until, months and months. For me, it was, nigh on a year before I managed to get off. Yeah, because it was only a year from when I came to when I left. So it was just a few months that I was going through the kind of normal stuff, the EPF, and then the Commodore's Messenger Org, and then I hit the RPF whenever that came into being. And then they had me, to punish you, it was real punishment. They had me get a little billy can.
What is a billy can?
A billy can is like an empty can of baked beans, for example, or something like it's got a little handle. It's called a billy can. I think they use them in Australia when they're camping, for drinking and stuff. And I had to go down into the engine room to where the bilge tanks were. Now the bilge is this disgusting waste kind of oil. It was horrible. And they had us using a billy can to empty the bilge tank, right? Even though there was a pump, it was just pure torture.
Just to torture and demean you. They had you doing that when there was a pump to do it.
Take away your soul completely.
Yeah.
Take away every inch of humanity you've got left in you. You become a robot completely. Alex was interviewing Dr. Alexandra Stein the other night, and she was talking about how people in cults live in this hyper vigilant state of fear.
Yes.
Fear that whatever you do, you're doing it wrong. Fear that you're always going to be wrong. Fear that you can never do anything right. Everything you're afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And you just imagine the impact that has on your soul and your body. It's just incredible, really.
Especially as a child, such a young child.
In your formative years, all the trauma is just horrendous, and it's very interesting that now I'm 63. It's only in the last 10 years, I'd say, that I've started unraveling so much stuff because I tried to push it back all the time.
Yeah.
And hide it,
When you were on the ship, did you meet L. Ron Hubbard?
Yeah. So I met him probably 3 or 4 times. Sometimes he would come out on the deck outside his office. He had strange hours, which I think Janice Gillen-Grady has talked about before, but he had strange working hours, and we knew when he was asleep because we were not allowed on the port side of the ship so that was all roped off. And also messages came around saying, we said the old man, we used to call him the old man is asleep, so don't make any noise. Also, Mary Sue, she had a dog, and when the dog came on board, it had been sedated for the flight to get to the ship. And because of engrams and everything, we wanted to be really, really quiet because the dog was under sedation.
Oh my goodness! And for those that don't know, Mary Sue is Mary Sue Hubbard. That was L. Ron Hubbard's wife.
Yeah.
And in Scientology and Dianetics, there's a belief that if there's pain and unconsciousness, your reactive mind will record that. So you're saying because the dogs were sedated, they were semi-unconscious, and you weren't allowed to say or speak around them because they might get engrams in their reactive mind.
That's right.
Wow.
Anyway, that was an aside. So LRH used to come out onto the deck, and then you could walk by, and if he made eye contact with you, he would say something like, "Hi, honey, how are you?" or something, which he did once with me. And you're kind of shaking in your boots a bit because it's like, this is the big man, himself.
Yeah.
And he was big to me. as a 12-year-old kid, he was a huge, massive man with big lips, and kind of always horrible teeth, and smoked cool cigarettes, I think, that he was smoking. And the Commodore's messenger would be standing there holding his ashtray, so he could, it was extraordinary.
Were the messengers there? Were there other children, teenagers? Do you recall?
All of them. All of them were young. They were either teenagers or youngsters. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you meet other kids who were there without their parents like you were?
Yeah. In fact, I know a very few who were on there with their parents. The majority weren't. There were a couple, but not many.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Horrendous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
there,
no schooling.
Wow. You contrast that to kids going into the Sea Organization today, where it's not on a ship. I mean, there is a ship, but they tend to go to Los Angeles or Flag, and the ones that go without their parents. But to put your child, your 11-year-old, on a ship in another country with no way of getting hold of them, not knowing where they are, I have a hard time wrapping my head around that one.
Yeah.
And so you're saying L. Ron Hubbard, his messengers, which were like his assistants, would hold his ashtray, just have it ready so that he could ash out his cigarette.
Yeah. Yeah. And they, if he needed a drink, they'd run and get him a drink, whatever he needed, that's what they were there for. Mm-hmm. If he wanted somebody to have a question asked, they would have to learn verbatim what that question was, and they had to run down to whoever it was, and verbatim they had to give the question, and verbatim they had to run back with the response, and so it went on. Also, he had an enormous temper, and one day I was on my hands and knees outside his office, scrubbing the floor, literally like Cinderella, and he had a hissy fit. He absolutely erupted, and I've never felt so scared in my life. It went through me. He just roared, and he threw his papers in the air. And Ken Urquhart, that's the guy whose name I was thinking of, came running in, to try and appease and find out what was wrong and everything. And I can't remember. I skedaddled. I was not going to hang around. No way.
Yeah. Was he upset with you, or he was just it just blew up at you?
Yeah. No. He didn't blow up at me at all. I was just there, and I just saw and felt it all, and just like, it was enough. I'm out of here. And I just went. No, I didn't want to. I don't know if I would have borne the brunt of any of that if he'd come out or anything. I wasn't going to hang around to find out.
Yeah.
But it was scary.
I bet.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm doing the RPF, and then I still want to go home. And so they're like, well, what are we going to do with her? Also, I better also say that I understand from Janice that they did have schooling when they first got to the ship, because they'd been on it earlier than I had, but there was no schooling for me at all, none. And I was assigned to the RPF's RPF then, and I couldn't speak to the RPF's members. Now, Ken Urquhart says there was enough food for the RPF members at the end of the day, at dinner time, but I know for a fact that sometimes we went without food because there wasn't enough food for us to eat. It was barbaric.
So you ended up on the Rehabilitation Project Force. What got you onto the Rehabilitation Project Force's Rehabilitation Project Force? So
not wanting to conform. I wanted to go home. I wanted to leave.
Rather than just let a 12-year-old girl go home, you were put on the RPF's RPF.
And of course, you're getting sec checked all the time. You're getting security checks all the time. What have you done to L. Ron Hubbard? All this kind of stuff, and wanting to find out what overs and withholds you've got, that you're withholding, that you don't want to conform and you don't want to stay. It's quite simple. I just wanted to be back in the bosom of my family. It wasn't a big deal.
You're 12. Yeah.
You're 12 years old. And also you're just like, everything's brand new. You know nothing about shipping, nothing about sailing, and you just got to make things go right. It's hard. There's so much pressure on you to conform So much pressure, and you're constantly worried about getting into trouble. And also there's a real element of kind of subversive sexual attention from men, because they're free to do whatever they like.
What do you mean by that?
So there's no restriction on a ship when you're at sea. Who's going to police you? You can't go to law enforcement if there's abuse going on, and abuse did go on. And also, the main thing is the abuse of children, with LRH ordering you to go into. So I was ordered to go into the chain locker of the ship for 3 days and 3 nights. And what that entailed was walking down into a hatch to sit on the shackles of the anchor chain, which absolutely reek, that horrible wet metallic smell. Mm-hmm. They're rusty. And recently I found out last September, I was flying back from Paris to London, sitting next to an engineer who said, and I was telling him the story about the chain locker, and he was saying, even today, engineers will go down to find out why the chain is, hooked or not working, whatever, and they never come out again, because the iron apparently absorbs the oxygen. And so they suffocate. And it's a thing. And I had no idea. I mean, I could have died. And I was in there with another, an African-American girl called Lisa, who'd lost the plot completely. She was all day, every day, all she would say is coffee, tea, or me, all day. And I was like going insane. It's like.
And how old was she?
Same age as me.
12.
Uh-huh.
So she was locked in the chain locker with you?
Yeah. I've never been able to find her. I don't know what happened to her, who she was. I just know her name was Lisa. And so just prior to being locked up in the chain locker, I remember sitting, we were at sea, and it was a velvet night, just quiet, but very dark. And I was sitting on the tarpaulin of the hold where we used to go down into to study. And Alex Zabersky was having a row with his wife, Maggie, and they were very near me. And I just turned my head because I heard the noise, and he came spitting in my face. What the fuck are you you're looking at, and this kind of stuff. And it had no impact on me whatsoever, because by this stage, you could have pinched me and I wouldn't have felt it. I was a nothing. I was a nobody. I was done. I was absolutely done. I had no fight left in me whatsoever. I had no life left in me. And I've said before, what talks to my soul in terms of an animal spirit is a dolphin. Because when I was doing deck work, I would stand at the prow of the ship or the aft of the ship, and I could see the dolphins playing in the water and following us as we sailed. And it gave me hope that there was life outside of the ship. Because in my mind, this was my jail, this was my prison, and I couldn't get off. I wasn't allowed to leave. And I couldn't understand what I'd done wrong. I couldn't understand what I'd done to deserve this treatment, because you're made to feel it's your fault.
Yeah. When you were in the chain locker for 3 days, were you allowed to leave? How did you eat or get water? What happened?
No. So they fed me like an animal through the hatch. They would give you a plate of food through the hatch. If I needed to go to the toilet, they would take me up, but you're escorted to the toilet and then back down again. And 3 days and 3 nights were in there.
And that was like your sentence. You were told it needed to be 3 days and 3 nights. Do you know why?
Because the same reason. LRH didn't know what to do with me. He ordered me down there. Hannah Eltringham was the one who carried out the order to put me in there. And that was where I was. And I knew I was getting into trouble, because all I wanted to do was leave. And I knew it's because they say I want to blow because I've committed overts against the organization or against LRH.
So you go in, I'm trying to imagine this. You go into a hatch. Does the hatch close?
Yes.
Is it dark?
Yes. You're complete darkness. The only light you have during the day only is where, where the anchor goes out. So you see a chink of light, that's all. And also you're terrified in case, what if somebody lets the anchor down? They don't know you're in there.
No kidding.
I would have been mincemeat.
Yeah.
Because have you seen how fast the anchors go? wow. I mean, they just like, there's no way I would have survived that. I was terrified.
So
Absolutely terrified.
you had to stay in there, you had to sleep in there as well.
Yes, yeah.
And at
And you
night it
can't.
must have been pitch black.
Yeah, you can't sleep. You're sitting on, there's no blankets or anything. You're freezing cold. You're wearing black boiler suit. You're probably stinking because you've not had a shower or anything. It was horrendous. It was horrendous. I cannot, and you know, to this day, it beggars belief to me that when I've spoken out to newspapers and online, that Scientology's reaction is, oh, you know, kind of like I'm a nobody and I don't know what I'm talking about, and it never happened. But everybody who says that, they weren't with me, were they? There are people who know exactly what went on. And the youngest child who was put down there was a 3-year-old.
In the chain locker.
In the chain locker by L. Ron Hubbard. And then there was another guy who was completely off the rails. He lost the plot completely. And he was locked up in the twin screw motor room kind of area at the back. And that, I heard him screaming in there. I heard him scream. Nobody's allowed to talk about it, by the way. You're not allowed to say, oh, did you hear that kid screaming? You just know it's going on. You know it's punishment, but you're not allowed to say anything.
Wow. And the girl who was with you, was she there for the whole 3 days as well?
Yeah.
And she just,
I don't know what happened to her afterwards, because when they took me out after 3 days and 3 nights, I was locked up in the laundry room next door, which was like, I guess it's like a kind of kitchen cabinet type thing with washing machines. It was light, and I don't know how long I was in there for. I think probably just a day. And then I was escorted off the ship. And recently I found the guy who was assigned to take me back to England. He's been out of Scientology for a very long time. He's a really lovely guy. And he kind of vaguely remembers it, you know? He vaguely remembers taking me back. But I had to petition L. Ron Hubbard to be allowed to join my family at St. Hill. But from that point on, I just got back into life again, was going to school on a daily basis and working in the org after school and in the evenings.
Did your mom know at all what happened?
Right. Well, after we left Scientology, you're not allowed to tell her. You're not allowed to talk about it.
No. So how long? So you go home. I mean, you're 12, almost 13 by then, and you have this secret. You've been locked in a chain locker for 3 days. I mean, locked in other spaces. You witnessed a lot of things, and like you said, there was abuse going on between some of the men and the kids.
Yeah.
And there were multiple children there without their parents.
Yeah.
When it would be found out about what was going on with that abuse, was anything done about it? Do you recall?
When my mother found out, do you mean?
Well, when you were on the ship, were you aware when you were on the ship that there was abuse going on between whoever it was? You had mentioned there were some men and then there were children and there was abuse going on.
There was, yeah, I think abuse, I never physically saw, I never saw any physical essay between couples, but I know that there was I don't know how to describe it. It's like a frisson or an energy and a flirtation. But you know, the girls were more coquettish and they were more sexualized than they should have been, because they were they were free to do that without any constraints. There wasn't anybody there to kind of say, you know, this behavior is not acceptable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they were older for their years. And I became one of those kids. You know, I was 12, 13 going on 20. And my first boyfriend when I was in the Sea Org, I was 14 and he was 24.
So when you left the ship, did you remained in the Sea Organization?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but you were able to be in the Sea Org in the UK, you said.
Yeah, and I was living in what was Stonelands, a big old manor house. We all lived in the commune together, and then we would be bussed into St. Hill on a daily basis. But we used to go to school, but then after school, no homework for me. We had to come. I was on reception at St. Hill. And then after a while, I got recruited into the Guardian's office, which is now today the equivalent of OSA, the Office of Special Affairs. And I was working for the Assistant Guardian for the UK, just as a PA, doing PA work. But what was fascinating about that is I saw a lot of stuff going on because I used to type the reports, and you saw there was a Bureau 1 in the Guardian's office who were kind of like the spy bureau. Mm-hmm. And, you know, stories of them going to people's houses where people had shredded stuff and literally getting the shredding and sticking it all back together again. So they were trying to get it, you know, so that the dirt on people. So a bit like they did with Mike Rinder when they were chasing him. You know, there were stories about following in the cars, or they would they'd invent stories about people and report them. You know, it was horrendous, really. Mm-hmm. It was so bad. And then after that, I got sent to the Flag Land Base to do my OEC, FEBC, so my organizational and my executive training. And I was in at the Fort Harrison Hotel doing the studies for a year.
And you were how old then?
I was 20.
Okay.
Something like that. And then I came back. So I was sent back as LRH Com for FOLO UK, the Flag Office Liaison Office. And that's about the time that David Miscavige started to take over, and the Commodore's Messenger org and got bigger, and they chucked out a whole bunch of people. It was around about 1981, 82. And they got rid of
can we go back for a minute to when you were 14?
Yeah.
And you're dating a guy who's 25. He's also in the Sea Org.
Yes.
Did you get married?
No, but I was raped by him.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. What happened when that was found out? Or did anyone find out?
Nothing. I didn't tell anybody. And then he married somebody, and they went, I understand that they went to America. I think she was American. And because we'd split up, I split up from him. And she flew back to England. I don't know why quite, but she went and told the ethics officer, who was a lady called Monica Carino. And she told Monica what had happened. Monica hauled my ass into the ethics office, and I was like, I had to write OWs up. I had to get sec checked.
And remember, like everybody who's listening, she was the victim. You were the victim of an assault. You were a minor child. This man was a 25-year-old adult.
Yes.
Yet you're writing up your Overton withholds.
That's right. And I was told that I could not report it to law enforcement. And that's when my mother found out about it, because I'd never told anybody. I was ashamed.
Yeah.
I was ashamed. And nothing happened to him. Nothing. And all that taught me is, as a child in your mind, is that men get away with anything they want. And so do Scientology. Mm-hmm. You know, it wasn't good.
That's amazing that absolutely nothing was done. And again, you were treated as if you were the you were the perpetrator when you were, you know, the victim and a minor. And there's such a long history of that happening in Scientology, where it gets covered up and the victim gets blamed. All to protect Scientology.
Yeah, 100%.
Because they don't want law enforcement.
Yeah. And I wasn't alone, Natalie. There were a lot of other girls who it happened to as well. You know, and a couple have come out to me talking about it, but don't want to talk about it publicly. But it's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then you're still in the Sea Organization. And then when you're 20, you go to Clearwater, Florida.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually quite enjoyed being there because, again, you had a routine, and I didn't have to do a lot of physical work and stuff. I literally was just studying every day. And then we had to be in bed by 10:30 every night and stuff like that. And then, you know, we got time off at the weekends, and the food was good because we'd been on beans and rice in England the whole time. You know. So yeah, I quite enjoyed being there. And then I was sent back a year later. And then as soon as I got back to England, they wanted to send me back to Flag to join the Commodore's Messengers again. And so I flew back to the States, and when I got to immigration, they wouldn't allow me to come back in. They thought it was a bit suspicious that I'd only just left and I was coming back again. Mm-hmm. So I went back as LRH communicator, and that was only for about a year, and then everybody got booted out. And what's interesting is Dave Miscavige, he really wasn't on my radar much because he and his two sisters, Denise and Laurie, had been with me they went to school with me when I was in East Grinstead. They'd come over to St. Hill, and Denise and Laurie were just our mates. You know, we also used to hang around together. But David was just like, I think he had asthma, I remember, and he just was auditing and going to school, and but wasn't there for very long. So I didn't really get to know him very well. And then all these years later, I hear, what, that skinny little kid, you know.
Turned out to be a dictator.
Yeah, absolutely. A dictator, yeah. Yeah, so, you know, it was something. And then my mum had a stroke when she was 42, and she'd been working every night till 3 o'clock in the morning for weeks. And she was absolutely exhausted. And my 8-year-old brother found her, and she was admitted to hospital. And by this time, I was working in Folo, UK, in another building, quite a long way away from St. Hill.
Was your mother a Sea Org member or a staff member?
No, Sea Org.
Okay.
Sea Org. And my brother-in-law was the CEO of St. Hill of AOSH UK. And my sister and he had been dating since my sister was 14. And they did marry. And I think he was about 20.
Wow.
Yeah. And they did marry and went on to have kids, but then they divorced after they'd left. But so there's me, my sister, my brother, and my half brother. We're all in together. And Mum had this stroke, and my younger brother, who was 8, had found her at Stonelands. An ambulance had been called. She'd been taken to hospital, and I had to hitchhike to the hospital from Folo, UK, to get to her, and it was quite a distance. And by the time I got to the hospital, she had already been taken out by the Scientologists. So 2 people turned up at the hospital before she'd had any medical intervention, and they took her out of hospital saying Scientology can cure her. We're going to take her out. No family member had any decision making in this. Scientologists took her out, and of course when you have a stroke, you have to have immediate care. You have to have immediate intervention. So she was paralyzed all down her left side. They put her in a room on her own at Stonelands, and my sister was nursing her. And my 14-year-old sister was nursing her. And she's lying there, cannot move. And when I saw her, I thought she was dead, you know? And my mother was a very sweet person, very loving, but very gullible, you know, and I can see how Scientology has walked all over her. She didn't have any mental strength to kind of fight her way out of that. And my sister was really worried about her and called another friend who was a nurse called Anna Rutherford. And Anna came, and a doctor was called, and she was readmitted to hospital. And then they just booted her out. No support whatsoever, none. No financial support, no anything. The family had to try and find a car, get somebody to, you know, everything the family had to try and sort out. By this time, my brother-in-law had left and been declared. My sister had left, and my mum had been booted out. My brother had left, and the other little brother. And there was me, I was left. And I thought, I'm not hanging around for this. Mm-hmm. And all the execs had been put on the RPF again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in 1982. So I just thought, I've had enough. I'm not doing this anymore. And I pretended that I had credit card debts and went moonlighting to pay them off, which I didn't have. And I wrote a CSW, a completed staff work, just saying, you know, how important it was that it wouldn't bring Scientology into disrepute, and I needed to go and moonlight. And then I just went and lived with my sister, and the Commodore's messengers came knocking for quite a while, for a few weeks after I was due back, and I wouldn't speak to them. And an ex-Scientologist found me a job in London, and yeah, the rest was history in terms of Scientology.
So by then your mother was out, and your mother, I mean, to have a stroke at 42, that's really young.
Really young. And she did, you know, she did quite well. She was always paralyzed down that side. And for quite a few years, she became a local councillor for the council. She was a Liberal Democrat. She got a job as a journalist at the local newspaper and what have you. But then over the years, the whole trauma took its toll on her physically. And very sadly, she was bedbound for about 10 years before she passed away in 2019. Yeah, she was a lovely person. It was very, very sad and tragic to see what happened, you know.
Yeah.
But the nice thing to come out of all of this is that when I was 21, I'd left Scientology and I started dating someone back when I was 21, Neville Chamberlain, who'd been in Scientology since he was 8, and he'd been on the ship with LRH, but much more on a kind of peer level of LRH, because he was older than me. He's 14 years older, and we dated for a while. But because I was only 21, I'd only just left Scientology, he was ready to settle, get married, and have kids. And I wasn't ready. And then all these years later, in 2016, we met up again when he was visiting his daughter near where I was working in Sussex. And we got back together again, and we married in 2018. So that was lovely. And as you know, I very sadly lost him. He died, in January.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I'm so sorry for your loss. We were going to do this interview earlier, and I remember when you shared that, I just could not believe it. And so I'm glad that you're here today. And
yeah, thank you. And I know you know what it's like. It's I'm not going to lie, it's not been long, but it's, as you know, it's a hell of a roller coaster ride. And when people are nice to me, sometimes it just sets me off.
No, I know the feeling.
Oh, wow. And we had his funeral last Monday, and we did him really proud. It was great. But it was meant to be, and it was just, at least Scientology did that much. They brought us together,
Yeah. I love that you met all those years later.
Yeah.
And then outside of Scientology, you were able to have that life together.
Yeah.
I think that's
I had
incredible.
to nurse him for the last 2.5 years intensively, and that was exhausting. And his body was ravaged with disease by the time he died. It was awful, but I'm relieved that he's in a better place, you know, and I feel him around me all the time.
Yeah.
So that's so cool. And I'm going to pick up where he left off and run his business again and things like that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So your mother, did you leave Scientology at the same time?
No, well, within a few months. They left first, and then I was the very last to leave. Yeah.
What was that like afterwards? Did you have, in my family, after we left, we didn't have a lot of conversations for a long time.
No, we didn't, because you're in shock.
Yes.
I think you're in shock, and you're living a life. I mean, you're going into the big bad wog world, as they used to call it, where everybody is scary because you're told that you're never going to make it out there. You're going to get sick. It's the reverse of what you should be doing. Yeah. And I remember going for a coffee, and this sort of hypervigilance. It's not only fear, but you're also like hypervigilant about where are you, who's here, who's around you, who can hear what you're saying. And you go for a coffee, and I was constantly checking my watch. Oh my God, I better stay. My daughters have said for years, I'd go to a restaurant. As soon as I finished eating, I'm gone. I'd eat really quickly.
Yes.
Like, you inhale your food because you don't have time to finish your meal. You've got to go,
Exactly. My former husband used to say, he used to call me a snake. He's like, you eat like a snake. I can't believe you eat that fast.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize that I was still doing it from being in the Sea Org. You only have a limited amount of time to eat, and you better get your food quick too before the food is gone. So you're just used to like elbowing your way in and getting your food and just eating it while you have it.
Yeah.
It was years before, it probably wasn't until, because I had left the Sea Org and I married my husband, who was a Scientologist. We split up. 2 years after I left Scientology, I met my Tony. And he was the one who finally was like, okay, you got to slow it down with this eating. That can't even be good for you. I didn't even think that I was doing it. Like, I didn't even recognize it. No. And then I started learning more to try to, slow it down. And it was still hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I've since learned when I came out that there was some experiences I had from a psychological point of view of the trauma was having on me, causing these issues. And the two major issues, one was I went through a period of not being able to swallow. I could not swallow. And so I was always in the school canteen. I was always the last one to be eating my food because I was terrified I'd choke. There was this constant fear of choking. And I just couldn't swallow. I don't actually know. And even to this day, to be honest, I mean, I've since gone on to do St. John's Ambulance course to learn how to resuscitate people and to do the Heimlich maneuver and everything, just in case. But I know that I had this fear of as soon as someone was choking on their food, I'd like panic and, run, and it was weird. And then the other one, which is very personal, but I don't mind discussing it because I think it's really important. Due to the SA that happened, I got this condition, which I didn't know at the time. And because when I was 18, I married a Scientologist. And it was at that time, and I couldn't consummate the marriage. I was physically unable to have intercourse. And he obviously frustrated him. And I was sent to Flag right at that point to do that training. And when I came back, the relationship just dissolved. It was a non-starter. But years, and he sent me to a doctor to be looked at and to check if I was okay. And then my doctor, an old English doctor, literally monocle. He had a monocle and he had a bow tie. And he's peering down there and he goes, "Oh, my dear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you that a good stiff glass of red wine wouldn't hurt." There was nothing physically wrong with me. It was mental.
But psychologically,
Psychologically, and I've since learned that it's called vaginismus, and I had no idea about it. And I've discovered this since, and this is all that trauma. And then I keep saying it's quite funny, really, but as soon as I left, I had no problem at all.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So you were how old when you left Scientology?
21.
21. And what was the first thing you did? Where did you go?
To live with my sister and her husband. And within a very short period of time, I know what happened first. I became David Gaiman's housekeeper and secretary. So David Gaiman had been the head of the PR in the Guardian's office. He was a well-known Scientologist at the time. And
for our audience to connect the dots, David Gaiman is the father of Neil Gaiman.
Yes.
The author in a lot of hot water right now.
Yeah. And Claire Gaiman, who is in the Commodore's Messenger Org, I think, who's married to Tim, and her sister Lizzie. And it was Lizzie's son who got married and I think took, with his wife, they wanted to have a Scientology wedding. And at the time, the law in England prevented the Scientologists from having a legal wedding in their chapels, and they took them to court. They took whoever the powers that be in England are, and then they managed to get it approved that Scientologists could hold weddings in the UK.
So you were working for David Gaiman?
So what happened was David had been declared. This was also all around the time. You remember that Mary Sue Hubbard had gone to jail, Jane Kemper had gone to jail, and there were 12 of them. They'd all gone to prison. And so David fell foul as well, and he'd been declared, and Sheila, his wife, and Neil and Claire were on the RPF with me at that period just before.
The whole family was on the rehabilitation project force.
Lizzie wasn't, but I'm as far as I remember, Neil, but definitely Claire and definitely Sheila, because Sheila was in my dormitory.
Yeah. So and this was in the UK.
Yes. And we were building, the castle in the UK?
Yes.
Well, we were building one of the wings. That's what we put down. We laid down the foundation stones and the walls for that. That's what we were doing.
Do you know why they were, or why Neil Gaiman was on the rehabilitation project force with you?
This is all to do with being linked to David, who was declared. So they were like all PTS, and they all had to, I remember Neil sec checking me and asking me, one of the sec check questions was, who was the last person you gave a blowjob to or something, Yeah. I mean, that was just one of the many questions. It's just crazy.
Because, that has everything to do with spirituality and spiritual gain. So was that on the rehabilitation project force?
Yeah.
Do you remember how long Neil Gaiman was on the RPF?
No, I mean, as far as I know, they were still on when I left, so I have no idea. I don't know how long they were on at all. No.
That is crazy that they put the whole family on the RPF because
they weren't in the Sea Org.
What? I thought Neil Gaiman was in the Sea Org.
Well, I don't know. They lived at home. I don't understand that. There's some confusion. Maybe someone else can help clear this up. But Sheila lived with David in their home. Lizzie and Claire lived with them, so I can only assume Neil did as well. I don't remember Neil joining the Sea Org, but they were on the RPF, so
Yeah, and you have to be in the Sea Org to be on the RPF.
yeah, so maybe they got them to sign a contract. Well, I have no idea. I don't know what happened, but they were
Yeah.
definitely on the RPF with me, 100%.
Yeah, because I think that's where he met his wife, Mary.
Mary.
Did you know Mary?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
knew Mary in the Twin
Yeah.
Cities here. She was probably still is a Scientology staff member.
Yeah. She wasn't a friend or anything, but I knew of her. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because they were in the Sea Org together, met, married. I don't know at what point they moved to the States, if that was, I think it was after the Sea Org, maybe. I'm not sure.
I think you're right. It was certainly after I left, which was 82. So 81,
Yeah,
82.
and Neil Gaiman was the executive director of, oh gosh, was it Edinburgh?
Was he?
He was the executive director of some Scientology organization for a while.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. I had been on mission to Edinburgh for 3 months.
Yeah, Alex is saying Neil was in the cadet org at some point, he believes. Do you
Yeah.
know, SP Crusader Lenny is asking, I was there when that was being built too. Was Ginger Smith on the rehabilitation project force at that time too?
He's asked me this before, and I can't remember Ginger because somebody said something about Ginger having to do with, was she complicit in setting up the original Commodore's Messenger org in the UK, possibly? Yeah, I don't remember.
No
I
idea.
should remember Ginger Smith, but I don't. I've been
Yeah.
asked that before. I really don't remember.
So when you were on the rehabilitation project force a second time then?
Yes, yeah.
And what got you there that time? Do you recall?
So I was LRH Com, and
Yes.
they needed to invent something to get me off because they got rid of all the execs. All the execs got just wiped in this kind of big mission that had come down. The Commodore's Messenger org were taking over. This was at the time when things just really got kind of messy. And also the OT materials had been stolen from Denmark.
Oh, that's right. By Robin.
Scott.
Oh God. Say it again.
Robin
Scott.
and Morag
That's right.
Delmain. Yeah. And Robin was my husband's brother-in-law.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and it was my husband's hat that he was wearing that hit to do the seal hat. My husband hadn't given it to him, his ex-wife had. But anyway, I found that quite amusing. Yeah. In fact, Robin was at my husband's funeral last week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know Robin was in the UK. So
Yeah.
Robin Scott and that other person, they wore Sea Org uniforms, just walked into the Denmark was it Denmark?
Yes.
Organization and demanded the confidential materials, walked out with it, and eventually put it on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was so much going on. There were so many people becoming independent. There were so many people meeting. There were people getting involved in, who did what, when, where, who, why, because they could suddenly talk to each other,
Yeah.
It was an interesting time. It was a really interesting time. But anyway, I'm working for David Gaiman, and he needed somebody to do housework, and he needed someone to be his secretary. So I was doing his typing and his letters and phone calls and making appointments in his calendar and whatever.
And this is diary. After you left the Sea Org?
Yeah. So I've left. But it wasn't long after I'd left, because I think it was actually probably in the period where I would have been moonlighting, So I was still in good standing, as it were. I hadn't been declared or anything. But he had to work. He'd been declared, so I should have, according to Scientology's rules, I shouldn't have been anywhere near him. I shouldn't have been working for him. But anyway, it was a job, and I really liked him. He was he was good to me, and he taught me how to write my first check. I'd never learned anything like that, and I learned stuff from him about what it was like living out in the real world, because I hadn't, like eating out in a dining room and going to restaurants and stuff. I never had any of that. So he was good. He was good in that way. And I was quite enjoying my life with him. And then one day Sheila walked in, and she'd come to kind of get him to do his, what we call A to E steps to get back into good standing. And she saw me and was absolutely furious and shouted at me and kicked me out the house.
Why? Do you know?
Oh, yeah, because what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. You're not allowed to be here.
Because David Gaiman was declared? Why were you not allowed to be there?
Yeah, because he was declared.
Ah.
Yeah, and also I don't know how much of it was kind of like, what are you doing in my house, you know? There might have been an element of that because she had no idea I was there. Yeah, because
Oh.
she was on the RPF at St. Hills, so she turned up, and I was probably quite a surprise because
Mm-hmm.
he hadn't told her either. She, you know, she didn't know. So I would have thought, oh, I'll get an apology from her because she was, you know, she just kicked me out. And he never saw me again. He never apologized. He never said any. He couldn't confront me. And a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call from her, and she said, would I come and have a coffee with her at the local Felbridge Hotel in East Grinstead? So I went and had a coffee, and all she wanted to do was get me to come back in again. There was
Back into the
nothing.
Sea Org?
Yes, there was nothing. She just wanted to handle me. There was no apology at all, you know. So I said, I just walked out and went home and goodbye. And there were a couple more attempts. There was somebody I got quite close to, a lovely lady called Judy, who used to work in New Zealand, and she was on mission. She'd been sent out on mission to get people back, and there was an amnesty, and she said, you know, come back on the amnesty. And I just said, no, I'm not coming back.
Was that the 93 amnesty?
No, no, it would
There
have
was one in
been
the 80s too, wasn't there?
80s, 1980s. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So from that point then, when you were just gone and out of Scientology, and then you weren't working for David Gaiman anymore, where did you go?
So that's when my old friend Victor, who used to be in Scientology, he was never in the Sea Org, I don't think. Don't think he was. I'm still in touch with him today. And he got me a job in London working for an IT company. Now, the one thing Scientology teaches you is that you can do anything you like. You can make it all go right. And I just bluffed my way through, and I managed to do really, really well. And I was earning good income, and I was working for an IT company, and I learned on the ground. And that's the one thing, you just bullshit your way through.
Mm-hmm. You just
And I
learn
managed.
it.
Oh,
Read it, drill it, do it.
absolutely. Absolutely true. Yeah. And so then I just went from that, and I moved up, and I worked ending up for 10 years, the last 10 years before meeting Nev, working in a big corporate in the IT department, facilities department first, and then IT. But yeah, I had a good time. But it's only since stopping work and going, breathing, and starting to do work on manifesting the life that you really want, and looking and doing some meditation, that I started to kind of breathe and look at, who am I?
Yes.
Who am I? What did Scientology make me become? And who is the true me? Who is the essence of the true me?
And so did you figure that out?
I'm doing it now.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, it's because, you know, all the time I'm remembering or thinking, cracky, that's why I was a real people pleaser. You know, I was a huge procrastinator. But in Scientology, I wasn't, because you have got to get things done now in Scientology. There's no kind of like procrastination there. You just got to do it, you know. But afterwards, I think it was kind of the complete antithesis of what it was in Scientology. It's like work, relax, don't do anything. Work. When you're out, relax, don't do anything. You know, it was kind of, it's taken a long time to unravel this, and I'm still unraveling it now.
Yeah, I feel the same way, exactly the same thing, where I would just work, collapse, collapse, collapse. And now it's like, okay, there's got to be a better way. Maybe I don't need to work at that level, or learning to kind of pace yourself. It's one of my biggest struggles, because I still feel there's so many things I want to do, that it's easy when it's something I want to do to have that kind of work ethic kick in and just, no, I can do it because I want to do it.
Yeah.
And I enjoy what I do, even though sometimes it's difficult, you know, when it comes to YouTube and doing my channel.
Yeah.
But it's made all the difference at the same time in my healing. And I get what you're saying. I totally can relate to how, even though you'd been out of Scientology for a long time, you actually didn't start to decompress till, did you say it was about a decade?
Yeah, at least maybe even less.
Yeah.
Maybe even less. And then, of course, meeting Nev, we still talked Scientologies to each other. You know, it's weird because it was easy to do it. But there was
Yeah.
another thing too. For my ex-husband, who I've got my two adorable girls with, I was losing myself when I was looking after my girls. So for 9 years of their life, I was a stay-at-home mom looking after them. And I just felt like I was brain dead because Scientology had yanked me out. I'd started, in England, we have O levels and then we have A levels before you go to university. And I had started my A levels at school and they pulled me out and wouldn't let me finish my A levels. So they pulled me out of education, and I was really enjoying my education to go and work for the Guardian's office, and I had no choice. I had to do it. And when in what I call my real life now, when I was with my husband, I was just brain dead after 9 years. I'm thinking I've got to do something with my brain because I know I'm capable of more. So I took myself off to university, and I went full-time, did a 3-year full-time degree and got my degree. And that to me was, Yabu sucks to you, Scientology, you know, fuck off. Do you know what I mean? I was like, you know, really, because they don't set any store by that.
Mm-mm. No, there's no value on education.
No.
On a traditional education,
Yeah.
just none at all.
Yeah.
And many, I mean, when I left Scientology, the first thing I did was starting to take classes so I could take, in the US, we have a GED, which is the equivalent of a high school diploma.
Yeah.
Because I had dropped out of school to go work for Scientology and then joined the Sea organization. So I was 40 and getting my GED, taking math classes and going and doing that. And then much later on, went and did the schooling to get my real estate license and then my broker's license. And then there's constant continuing education for that. But it is interesting how then my girls both graduated from college, and my oldest has a master's degree.
Wow.
And it's just, it's so different. You know, I always knew that at least with that, they'll always have that to fall back on.
Yeah.
To be able to use it's just how the world works, is it opens doors. And to do well for me without having that traditional education, it basically is sales. You got to be able to get into something where you can build a network and do that work.
Yeah.
And I enjoy real estate as well. So that, you know, that worked out great too. And it's very much a job of, even though you do the schooling for it, it's all you have to do it and do it and do it and do it to get the experience and to really understand it. And, but I'm with you on the whole, like it took, and I was speaking to Rick Ellen Ross, but it was someone else who said that it's an average of 12 and a half years to recover from Scientology, just as an average. And that's not even full recovery. That's just like where you get into that breathing space. And I relate to what you said, because it takes so long. And then you start realizing like, whoa, wait a minute. For me, it felt like I had just showed up in the world. Like I had just gotten here.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. And there's a real awakening happening for me where I'm just pinging these kind of realizations and thinking, God, you know, how the indoctrination is so embedded in your psyche that you forget to think for yourself. And what does that look like now as a true adult in the real world is you've got to learn to think for yourself, and it's actually scary.
Yes.
And am I thinking the right things?
Exactly.
And, you know, it's thinking for myself, is that right? You know, constantly seeking reassurance that it is right and you are okay. And it's like, whoa.
It's a whole new world and a way of learning how to operate in it.
Yeah.
And learn new tools. How, since you've left Scientology, you mentioned meditation. Have you found tools that help you kind of decompress from it and process it?
For me, is art. So I do art religiously, have done for the last 8 years, twice a week. It's something I get a lot of satisfaction from, but it's also somewhere that I can just go and decompress. And I don't know what, I can't describe it otherwise. It's sublimely serene.
Yeah.
It's
What kind of
just,
art do you do?
I do watercolors.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I really, really enjoy it. I love it so much. I'm learning on Thursdays. I'm trying sketching. We're doing portraits. That's a whole new ball game.
Yeah. And you
It's,
mentioned that you have children?
I have twin girls. Yeah, they're 30. And that's the other thing, how protective you become of your children afterwards. Whoa, don't you dare go anywhere near my kids.
Mhm.
And they know they wouldn't touch you with a barge pole.
Yeah. Did you
So,
have your children, was that after
yeah,
Scientology or during? After?
no, after, quite a long time after, actually. Probably about 15 years after, something
Okay.
like that. Yeah.
So they never
No,
experienced any Scientology.
no, and they weren't ever really curious about it either. They never really asked me about it until recently, when they've started to ask me a few more questions. They're not in the slightest bit interested, and they wouldn't go anywhere near it.
Do they know a lot of your story, like being a child and locked in the chain locker? What has their reaction been to learning those things?
It's actually beyond their ken. They can't, it's not real to them,
Yeah.
because it is so bad. It's so bad. And actually, I prefer them not to have to dwell on it too much anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not because I'm trying to hide anything, but they're living a really good, happy life. And they don't need to be. It was my life and my trauma. Yeah, I like them to live the true, authentic self life that they are, you know?
Hmm. I'm going to grab a couple comments here. Queen of Karma says, Danielle, you're so courageous and strong and resilient. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Marcy says, you are one tough cookie.
There is something about that, though, Natalie. I haven't cried a great deal about what happened to me in Scientology. It's taken a lot to break it. I felt like I had a cage of steel around me.
Hmm.
And it's okay to be vulnerable, and I'm only just starting to learn that that's the case. And so I've had a little bit of counseling with a really good counselor, and have since been able to release some of that.
Yeah.
But I still, some people might think, well, why aren't you crying about all that huge trauma? Because now I can trill it off like a story.
Yeah.
This happened and this happened and this happened, but there's almost like no reaction to what the impact that had on me at the time. And I'm still not there. I still know that I'm very stoic and strong about it. And you know what I mean? It's
I
weird.
completely do. I think I'm
Yeah.
exactly the same way. I
Yeah.
completely relate to that.
Yeah.
I do a ton of crying, but really it's not as much to do with Scientology.
Yeah.
I do it affect other people's stories affect
Yeah.
me more emotionally. I
Yeah.
will completely cry
Yeah. Stuff
with
on
other people.
TV. Oh,
Other people's
God.
stories, but my
Yeah.
own time in Scientology, it's funny,
Yeah.
I feel the same way. It's
Yeah.
very the way you even describe it, I feel
Yeah.
that way. It's almost like part of it is I don't even want to give them that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even giving you tears.
Yeah.
It made me hard.
But we weren't allowed to, though, were we? You see, that's the
Mm-mm.
other thing. We weren't allowed to cry. It
No.
was like case on post, get
Yeah.
back to work. It's
Yeah.
like, that's what I mean about them turning you into robots. That's how
Yeah.
a robot would work.
Hmm.
And that's all part of the unraveling that I'm trying to
Yeah.
get to the inner core of. Is like, I can even feel myself talking about it, feeling tense inside, like I did when I was on the ship,
Yeah.
holding it all in, holding it all in. It's weird.
You know what might be fun for both of us? Boxing. I was thinking the other day because my Tony had this boxing bag thing that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
hit, and
Punching
I
bag.
put it back up in the garage, and my grandson and my daughter were playing with it. And
Oh,
I thought, that's nothing I've ever really done, is just like let out that aggression. And I don't know, there's something that right now sounds very cathartic about that, even
Yeah.
though it's not. I don't walk around with it, like, I don't have hatred for Scientology or Scientologists. It's just very interesting to me how it's different from anything else that I've dealt with or
Yeah.
lost. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
I probably, because even like what I'm going through now, what we're both going through,
Yeah.
we're far away from Scientology and we're processing it and going through the grief in the way that you should. But all my time in the Sea Org and a lot of the things that happen, I'm the same way. There wasn't a lot of tears. Sometimes there's certain things I'll talk about and there'll be tears, but I feel more like I can feel where I think a boxing bag would help to release some of it. It's almost like it's not, even though I don't feel the anger, it's hard to describe. It doesn't feel like it's going to come out just with
Yeah.
tears. I feel
Yeah.
like it's going to come out with just pure aggression.
Yeah.
And I rather take that out on a bag.
Yeah.
Yet I don't feel that towards Scientology. That's the interesting thing. I don't completely understand that.
I
Maybe
don't
someone can
either.
explain it to me.
No, I don't either. I still have affinity for the people who I left behind, who were my friends,
Yes.
who
Yes.
have, when I married Nev, they disconnected from me. Funny enough, there were two people who were still friends with me who were in Scientology still, and they completely just disconnected from me as soon as I married Nev, which I found interesting. But anyway, I just want to, anybody can, I don't care, they can study anything they want, they can believe in anything they want, but the abuse has got to stop. And that's the thing that we're fighting mostly. They've got to be accountable for their actions, past, present, and future. They have got to change. And the old archaic policies of L. Ron Hubbard, somebody needs to wake up to the fact that these have got to change.
Yes, exactly. And I think part of, for me, that helps with my healing, and part of how I feel like I can feel some of it releasing every time I share somebody else's story, sharing more of the truth. For me, that's my metaphoric, that's my punching bag. That's how I'm getting it out, by continuing to, shed light on the truth about Scientology and the reasons why it's a human trafficking cult, and the abuse, and getting that out. There's something so satisfying about that.
Yeah.
And knowing that they hate it, and that, it's just like, they're so not cool with it. There's something about that I find incredibly empowering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a way too, for me, that it comes out, because I don't have feelings of anger about it, or, that aggressive feelings towards Scientology, but I definitely, whatever it is, I can channel into doing what I do here on YouTube. And that I find to be incredibly satisfying.
Yeah. I'm with you there. I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Let me grab another one of these comments here. Queen of Karma says, Danielle, I'm just glad you got out when you were young enough to go live a good life. I hope you had a wonderful life after leaving.
Yeah, I did. And I still am.
Yes. Apostate Alex says, so in short, leaving Scientology gave you the same end phenomena as operating Thetan level 8. Now you know who you are not.
You know what? I actually thank God every day, Alex. I never did my OT levels. I only got to clear.
Yeah, I forgot that operating Thetan level 8 is you find out what you are not, or something like that. SP Crusader Lenny says, Danielle, you're an amazing woman.
Thanks, Lenny.
And an inspiration. Terry says, I wasn't in a cult, and I'm always rethinking and trying to make the right decisions. I hear that. Jess LaBarber says, I sat my boys down and told them before I told my mom. They were in high school then. So Jess LaBarber was in the Sea Org. She was up at the Int base with David Miscavige. She had to salute his dog.
Oh, yes. Insane.
Yes. Miss D says, I remember going to the Gaiman's house, and Neil was living there at the time.
That's right. In fact, what's interesting, Natalie, is that Neville, my husband, he knew David Miscavige's family when they were young, and he actually shared his bunk when he went to stay at the family home when David Miscavige was a small kid. And I used to like Neville's stories because he could always bring them down a peg or two, to say, talk about who they really were like. Same with Mike Rinder. He knew Mike when he was a kid,
Oh, wow. He's got to have some great, or had some great stories. I'm glad he shared it with you.
No, definitely.
Alex says Danielle's one of the strongest women I know.
But that, you see, therein lies the rub. For me, when I hear that, I think, am I strong, or is this the iron cage that's holding me back?
Yes, I feel the same way. I'm like, am I strong, or one day am I just gonna snap?
I know, seriously.
I don't know. Stay tuned. Valhalla says your emotions were disconnected from yourself while in Scientology. Of course, it's easy to disconnect emotionally from the facts of the story. Right. Those emotions feel safer to come out in other places. Oh, that makes sense. Deanna Ross said protesting helped me. It was very cathartic.
Yeah, and I've done that, and I've done it with Alex. Alex and I were like, there was only the two of us standing with a banner outside the org up here, because it was outside the Winter Gardens in Sunderland, and they had rented a room out to the Scientology org, and we're thinking, do you know who you're renting to? And so we stood there with this kind of banner. It was just me and Alex, and then one lone guy came along with a dog, so the three of us and a dog. They called the police on us twice. The police didn't even speak to us, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, they knew the drill. Kathy Scogans says, my heart hurts for the child you were, but is also proud of the person you are.
Bless your heart. Thank you. That's lovely.
Tiggy says, just a thought, maybe if the past isn't affecting your present, maybe you're okay. Sometimes life, for example, relationships can heal you.
But that's the dilemma for me, is how much of the past is affecting my present. I'm still unraveling that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think some things too, it's like, how could we know? It's like it's peeling that onion. It often comes out in layers, is kind of like what my experience has been like.
And who would I be anyway if Scientology hadn't come along?
Yeah.
How much of me today is who I would have been without Scientology?
Yeah, exactly. I think that often, and that's why I think it's a waste of time to have too much regret, because same thing. I'm like, well, I really like who I am today, and I might be somebody different had I not had that experience. And as much as I think I would prefer not to have had that experience in Scientology, I mean, I was just thinking the other day how, Scientology impacted my family for generations.
Yeah.
And similarly with yours.
Yeah.
That is a huge impact, especially when it's negative.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind when I think about that, like, wow. But at the same time, I'm so grateful that I'm not there anymore, that I'm not living that life, that I don't want to waste any time. No. I want to have fun. I want to do the things that bring me joy. I want to focus on that.
Yes, absolutely. And also, we're talking about Scientology affecting us. There are people who maybe were drug addicts in the past, and they're going to have the same sort of questions, or people who were abused, by their father or their mother or something. They're still going to have similar experiences, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so.
But who am I? Where am I? How did it affect me?
Yeah. Does it matter to you, not to me, says that's the conundrum. We all live with that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I get that. And good to see you, neuropsych. Make sure you catch the beginning if you're doing the replay. Well, Danielle, I'm so thankful that we had this conversation and that you're sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
I definitely will have to do this again. I know that a lot of times in hearing stories, it's like I process it, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to know about this, and this now. So we'll stay in touch. Please do stay in touch.
Yeah, I will too. I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Cool. You hold tight. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. But you hold on just a second. Alex says, great stream. Well done, Danielle.
Thanks.
Oh, wait, there is a question here from Luna. Is there any experience of people forming factions that were positive in any sense within the snitch culture cycle? I mean, was there any positivity from the cult snitch culture cycle? For me, my answer would be no. Nothing
No.
ever came of that. That was good. And a lot of thank yous in the chat for doing this. Please, everybody, make sure you hit that like and hit the subscribe button as well if you're not already subscribed. And in the meantime, I hope everybody gets out and has an amazing cult-free day.